The United Nations are a central pillar of the geopolitical order. They were founded after the Second World War with the goal of maintaining global peace and security. Yet today, with wars raging in Ukraine and the Middle East, can the UN still fulfill its original promise? Is its functioning still adequate to deal with the challenges of the modern world? And what impact does the UN really have on people's everyday lives? In today's episode, you will get some insights on all of this and more.
If you ask a young European if they trust more the EU or the UN, they will answer the EU. The United Nations, in the way that it is now, it's not working. It needs to be changed. It needs to be reformed. If I might say, like certain personalities, strong personalities within the countries, the rising of populism, this plays an important role. I think the very first thing that has to be changed is the veto power within the 5 members of the Security Council. I think it lost its hard power. The problem is the lack of accountability mechanism, the lack of enforceability of the international law. There is genocide from one side, there are like breaches of international laws, but then what happens?
Our guest, Giulia Tariello, was the EU Youth Delegate to the United Nations. This diplomatic experience gave her invaluable insights into the world of international organizations and the power struggles within them. As Youth Delegate, she advocated for fairer education systems and more inclusive politics. Today, she is one of the leading EU policy influencers, with over 100,000 followers. She's a fierce believer in the power of multilateralism, but also talks with us about its limits. Giulia, thanks a lot for being here and welcome to Moving Europe podcast.
Thanks for having me, inviting me.
Today we're going to talk about the United Nations, and you're quite the expert on it with several years of experience as a UN Youth Delegate. In these experiences that you made, how powerful do you think that the UN really is, and how much of an impact can it make on the everyday lives of citizens?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I think this is one of the questions that are the most asked worldwide, and I also ask myself this question every day, probably, because it's not a secret that we are living times of uncertainty, living times of insecurity and unsafety also for some part of the world. So I think that when we think about the UN, we need to remember that they are not a world government, but just a platform where, member states, countries can forward their own power so it can be amplified through the platform of the UN. Because we sometimes forget that they are just a group of 193 official member states. So when we point the fingers toward the institution, whether it's the UN or any institution, we just need to remember that it's not entirely the institution's fault, but it's the members that composes the institutions that are probably not working well at the moment.
So it's sometimes not even the fault of the institution, but more of the members of the institution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I continue saying this because we know that the United Nations, in the way that it is now, it's not working. It needs to be changed. It needs to be reformed. However, when we think about how we want to reform it, how we want it to change, we should question what's not working within the member states again. It's like, even if I think about, again, the UN or the EU, I think, this regulation is not working. This resolution is not enforced. But is it the UN fault that the resolution is not being enforced? Or is that the member states who are not receiving the regulation inside their own national norms to make it enforced? And then, of course, the problem is also that for the UN we lack a sovereign, how to say, like a controller body that can actually impose a consequence of breaching what are the norms or international law. This is something that we're missing. So yeah, I think
And it's incredibly difficult because it was founded 80 years ago after the Second World War. So it's, I think, also very hard to make an organization which works for such a long time. Yeah. If you could choose like one thing that you would like to change in the UN, what would it be in terms of organization?
Yeah. First, I want to say that the common belief is that we often here this is the longest time that we have in peace, but I don't think it's true, because in Europe there is peace, but in other parts of the world there is still conflicts, war, hunger, and poverty. So it's not this is something that we should not say, probably. I think the very first thing that has to be changed is the veto power within the 5 members of the Security Council, and then probably enlarge because to give a short context, there are several groups of members who have different perspectives on how the Security Council can be changed. Italy has its own perspective, then it's Germany, Japan. Everyone has their own goals for it to change. But I think that regardless of what happens, it should reflect more the current status of the world. We don't have the 5 powers anymore, or even, we have it probably on paper, but now the world is bigger in terms of balances. So it definitely has to change, and we cannot immobilize the whole world because one country out of 5 decided that something should not happen. So absolutely the veto power has to go.
And among these 5 powers, indeed, like we have the US and China, for instance, it's very difficult to imagine a scenario where they agree on something, basically, Like, do we have some examples where they actually did agree on some policy in the UN?
Yeah, absolutely. There are many resolutions, to be honest, that I can recall. Like the latest one, probably it was also the ceasefire for COVID-19. They agreed, the 5 agreed on promoting the ceasefire for all the ongoing conflicts, or whether it was also not just the war that we commonly know, but also economic war, let's say. So it was possible for every country to receive the aid, to continue with the humanitarian aid also, or what was needed for COVID. And also during the Gulf War, it was possible also, for they accepted the sanctions between Iraq. So it was agreed. And also I like to mention, but I know that it's not probably talking about war and something so big, but for me it is the Youth, Peace and Security Agenda, because it's they all agreed, the Security Council agreed that young people and young voices should also be taken into account when talking about peace and security. And we know that these are not priorities for some countries, but in that case it was. So it was agreed for everyone, by everyone.
On the veto power, concretely for the audience, like if we would like to move forward for a system that has no veto, like how would it work in practice?
Yeah, this is complicated. Because if I think about the General Assembly, it's like impossible to have every member state to agree on something. So you have, the majority of countries agree on something, and so the resolution is passed. Then we also know that there are some cases like declarations or negotiations where every country, even when there is no the veto, have to agree on that specific scenario. So this is actually very complicated question. Probably, I don't know, like the majority, or for example, I don't remember now which groups that I mentioned before was rooting for this, but when the members have to decide on something that implies or like that has a consequence on them, they should not vote. For example,
conflict of interest.
Yeah, exactly. Like now, let's imagine there is a resolution now for I mean, I don't know, like sanction against Iran, or and the US have to vote, you cannot, because of course you will go for it or against it because you are directly implied in that. Or if it's a resolution for like humanitarian aid in Ukraine or in Palestine, it's normal that the US or Russia will vote against. So it's and this is something that happened. They're blocking still, especially for Gaza and humanitarian aid. It's still,
because I imagine how many things more the UN could do without this veto block.
Absolutely. Yes.
On Gaza, Ukraine, and the most recent crisis. No, the UN indeed is not to be blamed because it's not the one with the capacity of acting concretely. But why did it lose its capacity of influence?
This is again a bit complicated. I think it lost its hard power. So the power that the UN had as a institution to secure like the peace, security, to collaborate. Again, the UN are just a platform, and they facilitate exactly. They create an environment for member states to countries to collaborate where they like naturally won't collaborate. They're not countries are not made for collaborate. No, Hobbes were saying that so exactly. So this is something that we should consider. So I think that was the hard power, the power that they had before, that is now lost, or at least is going in that direction, unfortunately. And I think also the rising of, if I might say, like certain personalities, strong personalities within the countries, the rising of populism, this plays an important role, because we have also, if we think about our country, like Italy, we see that there are some shifts in that don't necessarily go in the direction of a specific party, but towards the person that represents the party. So this has an impact, because you think it's more important to follow, for example, the person. And we see now with the Board of Peace, I mean, it's on paper, it doesn't make any sense, but still, countries are following, not because they believe in the Board of Peace, but because they believe in what the Trump administration is saying. So this is, something that could work. And finally, just to mention, again, I think it's not, the problem is the lack of accountability mechanism, the lack of enforceability of the international law. We have the International Court of Justice, but we have rulings saying that there is genocide from one side, there are like breaches of international laws, but then what happens? I mean,
the US is not there.
Exactly, or like Putin is still in Russia. So how we can change this? And again, from my perspective, I will resend this discussion to the member states, because it's partially their fault.
This idea of having a platform for people to engage is great when people want to engage. So if countries want to engage, but in other times, especially now that you really see, Trump on the one side, Putin on the other side, Xi Jinping on the other side, they're not really willing to engage on many of the big questions. Do you still see that on smaller issues, the UN has an added value? And what are those places where you think that we really can still make an advantage in through the UN?
Yeah, absolutely is. I will never ever say that the UN are not valuable today, or that we don't need the UN. We need very much the UN, and because we tend to think immediately to the things that are not working, and with the let's say the most common thing that comes to your mind when you think about the UN is peace and security, but it's not just that. It's also like producing norms, coordinating the norms, and humanitarian aid. And again, when we think about United Nations, this is a whole world. It's not just the General Assembly and the Security Council, but there are all the agencies, the departments that are working to help member states to fulfill some goals that could be like the Agenda 2030 goals. So when we think about the world hunger, we know that the World Food Programme is working also with the money of those who are not like paying their fees in a duly time, or you know, they're still working. And again, this is truly something that I try to remind myself every day, because I'm like, why do we need the UN? Because it's still like, peace is not there anymore, and war broke everywhere, is breaking everything. But again, those people, if we think, I don't know, like again, Palestine, Lebanon, Iran, they need humanitarian aid, and they need that the UN, whether it's the human rights, the office of the human rights commissioner, or if it's UNDP or any UN agency and departments are working for, to secure, this.
Yeah, and it's a huge organization. We looked up, it's like 130,000 people across the world. There are all these different agencies, and I think it's also for people genuinely hard to understand what the hell the UN is doing, because it's just so huge. So how do you explain this concretely?
This is also not easy. I'm trying to do that in my platform. I, for example, analyze once every week, more or less, one specific UN agency or department, and I say where is it located, where people can find their local offices, because again, normally people think about the UN in New York, Vienna, or Geneva, but they have many country offices. Yes, and actually that's where they do the majority of their work. They work on field, they are with the people, they are concretely building things. If we think about, for example, the United Nations development program, again, the World Food Program, they're feeding people and practically doing something. And this is the work that is not often seen and not often valued. So from my perspective, it's by informing the broader audience, especially the younger audience, is where we can a bit more combat this disheartening feeling that the UN are not doing enough and they are useless.
Yeah, and you have a lot of followers on Instagram now, so it means that there is appetite, for this information at the end. The UN has an impact on the small things in life of people that are really important to them, like food security. When we talk about the UN, we have the macro picture in mind, but we don't really understand how many people lives it changes. There you think there is a member of the UN political responsibility?
I'd say in this question 50-50, meaning that from one side is the UN fault in not probably communicating well what are their programs and projects or initiatives, and from the other perspective, it could be also the fault of the local authority to not want to highlight a certain like achievements, because that can be I don't know, like if we think, for example, UNDP is building a bridge in a very small community in, I don't know, let's say now we call it in the majority of the world now, right? So they're building this bridge and it's helping people, but then the local authority is like a militia, let's say, and they don't want that bridge to be built, and they don't want that the attention comes from the bridge to be built. So because that will, bring, I don't know, even more money or something that it's can help the community flourish, but they don't want the community to flourish. So it's I think this is also a game, if you allow me this word, of miscommunication, false information that sometimes happen. And I know that this is something where the UN is also working. They have a big department in communication, also to combat, of course, false and fake information. So
which is a quite harsh job, no?
Absolutely, yes. Also, because it's you see like fake information, misinformation, but also too difficult to acknowledge when it's a tentative of how it's, because it's called FEMI now in the EU, false information and misleading misleading. It's but it's the EU that calls FEMI.
Okay.
We don't know everything about the
this weekend.
It's misleading. That's the word, because you think it's true, but it's leading you to think that something is true, but it is not at the end, which is different from notice. But
yeah. Do you think this happened, for example, also in Gaza, because the UN was heavily criticized? You think also there was misinformation ongoing?
Yes, probably, because of I think during war times, one of the means of war, it's the methods of war, it's also miscommunication or fake information. And so we were having, I think that was also a bit of a hysteria at one time, that the internet was divided with the pro-Palestine and the pro-Israel, which made absolutely no sense from my perspective, because it's not a soccer match, is people dying and going to war. So I think that totally, possibly there was some misinformation, and I know that also in that case some people were using Instagram and TikTok to spread more awareness of the situation in Gaza, and I think that was also an interesting perspective, probably also winning thing to do.
In your time as a UN youth delegate, did you ever have the chance to actually go on the ground to see how the UN is operating, or were you more involved in the headquarters?
I was more involved at the New York level, and sometimes Geneva, but mainly in New York. So I saw actually the bureaucratic machine that the UN is. So I know that on Instagram everything is fancy, but it's actually a lot of work behind a computer, or like in meetings and negotiating, which is great. I mean, that was also exciting, but I think it's a part of the medal that it's not considered sometimes. Probably I could call on field the work that I was also doing when I was the Italian youth delegate, because I was traveling in Italy to meet students and young people to get to know what were their priorities, so that I could but at least bring a bit of their voice in the UN.
And in the end, that's probably one of the main effects of this delegate program, no? That you learn something and you bring it back in your local circles.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes.
Now looking back, what would you say is the thing that shaped you the most?
I think one thing is
you can choose two.
Choose two. Surely being in such an international environment is it's crazy in a sense, because you get the feeling of the diversity, and you truly learn from one another, and not just when you have this similar mindset, but also when you have to agree on something that it's not that similar, especially because we were not representing our own beliefs, but we were representing the beliefs of our member states, so it wasn't easy at all. And also seeing actually how the negotiations were going, and I like to personalize a bit more what are all these papers that arrive from in this on our table. We just see a new resolution was approved, but what does it mean? How was the process for its approval? So being there and seeing all the process that led to a specific adoption, that was great.
Yeah, and I think what you do that is also very interesting is that you try to translate this bureaucratic language in something more general. On this, do you think young people are more enthusiastic about the UN as they are, for example, about the EU?
I think this is I don't think that they're more enthusiastic. Actually, I think that maybe they have, if you ask a young European if they trust more the EU or the UN, they will answer the EU. Because the UN is maybe a bit more perceived a bit more further than the EU, because we can see every day the EU. I mean, it's something that affects our lives practically, even the UN, but probably being Europeans, we don't see that directly, the impact of the UN. But if I would ask, a person from another country, another part of the world, if they feel an impact from the UN, probably if they're from one of the regions or of communities where the UN has an office, they will surely say yes. I think. But I think in general, young people are losing their interest and trust in institutions, and that's something that we should avoid.
In general or international institutions?
I think a bit in general, not just, but then international. It's like a scale,
top level.
Yeah, it's a scale. You start losing trust because I don't know. You see your mayor, or you see your national PM that is not what you was hoping for, and then how can you trust the EU or the UN? So
and this, I think, is the central challenge, no? Because in our world, we have the need to have supranational institutions, the EU, the UN, organizations like this, but they're very far away from the person, from the citizen. So we need it, but it's very difficult to communicate, and we risk that people get alienated, and then maybe they vote, for populist forces. So how do we avoid this? How do we deal with this dilemma?
Yeah, first think about the audience, what we want to communicate, to who we want to communicate, because I think in the last probably 5 years, we meaning like institutions are understanding that the need is changed. They need to communicate more with young people instead of just communicating within their own bubble or from member state to member state, or from just between people who understand, but they need to communicate first to those who don't understand, and that they need to have that mind, the shift in mind. So I think in being a bit more approachable and avoid all that jargon, or that because even I know that the EU, UN is the same. We just talk with acronyms. What are the acronyms? Yeah, I mean, it truly, we have to simplify our language.
Mass media communication has also changed a lot. I don't know if you watched the recent interview of Meloni. The UN is modernizing itself in terms of communication because most of it passed through the web.
Yeah. Yes, they are modernizing. I still think that there is a work to do, because of course there is the fear of not being institutionalized, or the credibility. This is something that is still there, and I believe it has to be there, but still, you can compromise, you can shake a bit more and be a bit juvenile probably in a way, but this doesn't have to lead in the wrong direction, because sometimes when I see it in institutions, when they think, oh, I need to talk with a younger audience, then they basically shift the communication as if they're talking with a 13 years old, and that's not it. We just, we also, the young people, we also want to be taken as, capable of understanding, but you need to use our more comprehensible language.
What I'm wondering, in your experience as a youth delegate, were there situations where, for instance, the hostilities between countries were also visible at the youth level, so that you would not talk with, I don't know, the Chinese delegate, or you would not talk with the Russian delegate, or is that not happening at the youth level?
Okay, I will tell you 2 stories. The first story was between youth delegates. It was because at the end we were just more or less on the same line. The problem was with some actually EU member states, because we were working as the delegation. So as EU youth delegate, I was coordinating the perspectives and input from youth delegates from EU member states.
Yes.
So we were gathering, having meetings. We had this matrix, so this like table where you have like point A, B, C, and D, and what is the input of France, what is the input of Italy, Germany, blah, blah. And since we were representing the countries, there were some countries who had not so clear positions on certain topics, so it was hard to coordinate that, but also fun to feel as the real delegation. The second funny thing, which probably is funnier. So the very first thing that we were doing as delegates was reading a statement inside the third commission, the third committee. Sorry, the third committee deals with like social development, human rights, youth, blah blah blah. So I wrote my statement that was accepted by the EU delegation, and I was reading on behalf of the EU delegation, and I was citing like floods that were happening around the world. And I cited India and I cited Pakistan because that was just on the news. And after my statement, the Indian delegate approached me and was like, what were you thinking? You cannot just, talk about India in that way. We didn't like the word that you used. I was like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. I'm just stating what happened. I'm not. So basically, I risked a diplomatic accident because of she wanted to talk with our ambassador because of my statement, and likely the diplomats who were with me, they spoke through the diplomat from India, and the problem was basically that I was talking about India and Pakistan in the same sentence.
Yeah, I think that's the trick.
So for her, it was that's just to say that you really need to be careful of everything that you say, and then probably now you think, oh, so she was arguing over a word, which I thought the same at the time, but still, these things happen.
She took a bit offense, no?
Yes.
But so it means that you're also very much in contact with the EU delegation. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
It's
I am
the youth level and let's say
at the same level. We are part of the delegation. It's not like I'm not working for the delegation. I'm part of the delegation, and that was that's something that it's probably not understood. So I was there, like delivering the statement, negotiating with the diplomats of the delegation. So it wasn't something the youth or the diplomats.
I'm happy that you say this because I think it's maybe not fully understood. People hear youth delegate, like what's that, But actually, you're actually fully incorporated into the diplomatic system in the end.
Yes. For just limited time, I wasn't diplomat, but it was great to leave as a diplomat a bit, and I dreamt to become one day. So it was very good.
In the UN, the average age, you will say like it's
depends from the missions, but I say like 50 probably.
50, okay, so not that different from the EU.
40, 50, yes.
In terms of impact of the UN policy, do you think it's something negative in the end, that the average age is still so high in terms of also perception of what are the...
Yeah, we are lucky because we have UN Youth Office. It was established in 2022, if I'm not mistaken. And their work is basically to bring the youth perspective in every policies or in everything that happens in the UN. The UN Pact for the Future, it was... it's basically on youth in present, future, and future generation. So it's there. Sometimes it's just difficult again for member states to acknowledge the power of the young people. Yes.
For a young person who wants to approach the UN, what would you say? Why they should do that?
Why? I think so. Let me phrase it like this. On my Instagram channel, every day I receive people asking me, how can I work for the UN? And then I see that they actually have no idea about what the UN is doing. So there is a difference from the idealization of the UN as a great institution to work for, or like to have probably like good money or whatever they think it is, from what it actually is. So when I ask myself why you would love to work for such institution, for me is that because I still believe in it, in its initial goal, let's say, and because I think that, I mean, I want for the UN to have an impact, continuing having an impact on the lives of the people worldwide every day. And so probably even if in a tiny bit I can achieve that, it's my end game probably.
When you are very, very young and you approach this institution, you really think that you're going to save the world, you know, and then later you learn that even a small impact is still a big impact, you know. Like when did you do this shift? Was a natural happening or?
I think more or less natural. Yes, it came during the years at the UN. It came a bit of for disenchantment of what the UN were, because you see the reality, you see the world where it's going, but you also understand that change needs time to happen. So initially we all see, you know, like people arguing on something and we think, oh yeah, so tomorrow we will have this change. No, it probably will take 10 years. So even now, I mentioned before the Pact for the Future, we have the Pact, we are in the process of implementing the Pact. The UN Youth Office is constantly checking with member states the status of implementation of this Pact, but still I know that things are not changing now. In 5 years, probably it will in 10 or 20, we don't know.
And I also think, you know, that at the end of the day it's also necessary that it's a bit slow, not super slow, but it needs to be a bit slow, no? Yes. Such a big machine with such a big impact is not that they can take and implement a decision overnight. Also this, I think, is something that is not immediate, and you don't like at the beginning.
Yes.
I didn't like it either.
I think it's always good to say that even in a group of friends of 6 people to organize a weekend, it takes you sometimes 2 months, you know.
Yeah.
And then imagine 193 countries with 8 billion people. It's very tough. One more thing I wanted to ask you. Now, in this time, we see that actually a lot of alternative international organizations are mushrooming around the world. So there's the BRICS, there's the ASEAN, which are kind of little antagonists to the idea that the UN represents to be holistic. Do you see this as a real threat to the UN?
No, and if you mentioned, for example, the Board of Peace, again, I would say probably yes. But if you mention ASEAN, or Mercosur, no. It's would you say this for the EU? Do you think the EU is a threat? Then why ASEAN should be a threat for the UN? I think, of course, it's different from the EU, but they are. I see it as group of alike countries that come together to pursue first their goal of their region, and then to bring the common decisions toward the UN. And this happens, again, it's not visible, but inside the UN there are many groups of like-minded countries. It's like the group of 77. There are, the EU, of course. So even if they're not existing in organizations, there are still, again, like-minded groups that are coming together to support a specific negotiation or position that they are proposing. And I think this is strong because it can give even more power to decisions that are made, because then I don't know, like if I'm in the EU, if I'm 5 out of, no, maybe not 5, but like 15 out of 27 agree on something in the UN, then maybe the other can follow because the EU agrees on that, you know?
Do you feel that the EU member states usually behave with one voice in the UN or not at all?
Yes, in the UN it happens not every time. We see it in the when it's in general at the General Assembly level, when they have to vote on something, they are not always agreeing, unfortunately. But when it comes to negotiating language, for example, or like a declaration or resolutions or on something that deals with human rights, social development, this absolutely, yes.
And Giulia, I would say, to conclude, like, where do you see the UN in 10 years?
I hope I can see it stronger than now. I see it reformed. I see it less, in a way, if possible, like bureaucratic, in the sense that we will need less to communicate better. We will need more, as you mentioned before, the generational gap, more young people at the top, a bit more diversity in it, and not just when we talk about the top positions in the Secretary General, or just really in the body of the UN. I hope it also to see delocalized. Because New York is a very expensive city, and the US are very not an open country for many other member states. So I hope to see these reforms to make it a bit more inclusive. Probably I would use this word. Yeah.
Well, fingers crossed, and thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Grazie.